Here I am in a gur in the Altai mountains of northwest Mongolia. We were just kind of completing our descent of our attempts at Mount Khuiten and Mount Malchin, where on the descent of Mount Malchin, I slipped on the rocks and smashed my elbow, actually rupturing the skin. It subsequently became really infected. And unfortunately up there, again, this is an extremely remote area. We didn't have the right antibiotics to help stem the infection. Luckily, a fellow climber actually had a few Bactrim left in his pack from a previous climb that I began to take, which actually began to stem the infection. But my arm was, was kind of swelling up like a football. And here our guide, Ganga, is putting a poultice on there to help extract some of the infection from my arm, which was, not looking good at this point. So that was really a difficult situation as we were on our way down that I'll take you through in the other video, which is trekking in Mongolia. But here we are. Again, in another video, we're going to talk about the trek up to the entrance to the Altai Mountain Park. The Altai Mountains, by the way, are in the northwest section of Mongolia, a very remote area that borders both China and Russia. And so there's, again, another video that takes us there, as well as how I recovered from my injury and the adventures I had at the various hospitals in Mongolia, which could probably be a video in itself. But luckily my arm is back, so it's all good. It ended up good, but it was quite the adventure that was shared in a different video. But anyway, as we dropped off at the base part of the entrance to the park, Altai Park, we took all our gear, we put them on camels, and we had to trek up to our base camp. It was about a 10-mile trek from the entrance of the park to our base camp, where we were going to stay as we attempted to climb these two peaks. You may want to ask why we're using camels. Well, the Gobi Desert is a whole southern part of Mongolia. So camels are very indigenous to Mongolia, and that's what they used as the trekking animals to bring our gear in. Like in the Himalayas they use yaks, and in the Aconcagua they use mules. So different geographies use different animals to help transport your gear into these very remote locations. Yeah, so camels can be a little ornery, but this one kind of became my little buddy. He's a little gun shy there, but I was able to get pretty close to him. And but again, you have to keep your distance from these animals, and a couple times they did run off when they were left alone, and we had to the shepherds there, for lack of a better term, had to go and find them and bring them back. But overall they were great animals and a huge assist on this trek. So here we are at the base camp, where we're going to stay, and you can see that's Mount Malchin in the background, that we're going to attempt to trek up here the next day. This is an extremely remote area of Mongolia. There's only basically 100 or so climbers come into this region every year, with only 25 of them being foreigners. So again, it's probably one of the most remote places on earth. And again, in other video, I'll take you through that the whole trains, planes, and automobiles that allowed us to even get here after about 4 days of travel. So here we are walking up to Mount Malchin. Mount Malchin is about 13,500 feet, and we're going to climb right up along that ridge line, you can see. And on the right side, where you can see the snow, that's actually Russia. So this particular mountain, is right on the border of Russia and Mongolia. So we're going to literally be walking along the border as we attempt to get up to the top. And you can see it's all rock, scree. There's no glacier travel, and we'll show some other videos of that. That's really what kind of, it's a little bit treacherous coming down, which is one of the things that resulted in my fall. So here we are at the top. It was about 4.5 hours. It was a rock scramble. It wasn't all that easy. I mean, there was really not much of a trail, and there were a lot of rocks. You had to worry about twisting your ankle and getting up through that. But we made it to the top. Views were spectacular. This is the whole team, up at the top. We did have one incident where we were walking on the side where the glacier was. We did a little bypass, and one of our climbers started sliding down the glacier. It's very steep off to the side, so we had to luckily he was able to arrest himself and come back, but it was a little bit of a scary moment for one of the members of the team as we were heading up. And there I am on the summit there. And what we're going to do is, so this is Malchin, it's about 13,500 feet. Was non-technical, we weren't roped in, there was no glacier, but that's where we're going to go up here in a couple days, walk up that long glacier field. And you can see Mount Khuiten there in the background, again at 14,350 feet, which is the highest point in Mongolia. So there we are back at base camp again, and that's what we're going to walk up through, that rock field there, up that glacier field, to head over to Mount Khuiten this time instead of heading over to Malchin. There it is again, we're getting a little bit closer to it. So you can kind of see the rocks, get a little better sense of all the rocks and the scrambling. Really anxious to get onto the glacier. For me anyway, it's much easier to walk on a glaciated field with crampons than it is scrambling through all these rocks. And again, as I attested, I fell, the day before. My injury wasn't too bad at this point. It was sore, but it wasn't infected at this point. But I could definitely feel it, and was taking some ibuprofen to help ease the pain. So finally, we think we're on the glacier and the easy part of the trip. And unfortunately, this was July, and basically the climbing season there is only July and August. It's 2 months. This is a very harsh environment. It's about 60 degrees here, but again, the rest of the year it can snow. It's very cold. I'm not sure what the actual latitude is, but pretty far north, and again, the season is extremely short. So it was about 60 degrees, and the glacier was beginning to melt, but there were a lot of crevasses and running streams that we actually had to navigate as it was melting away. So you can see we're all roped in and having to navigate our way through this. So I was looking for something a little easier, and this was not easy, as well. But finally, we get up a little bit higher, where it's a little bit colder. Things are frozen. There's not as many crevasses, and we're on our way trekking up to we're having to trek up to what they call advanced base camp or high camp on Mount Khuiten. And here we are just grabbing a snack. Beautiful day, by the way. The weather was actually, up until this point anyway, really good on this trip. And there we are again. And that's our guide, Ganga. That's not her on the left. A little bit more about her later, but she's the one in that first video that was actually wrapping my arm, putting the poultice on. So I'll get a little bit more on her later. So there we are. This is what they call high camp or advanced base camp, and there's Mount Khuiten in the background. So that's what we're hopefully going to go up the next day. And you can probably see it. The path is there on the right. You can see it. And we literally climb up that ridge. So we're at about 11,000 feet here. And the summit of Mount Khuiten, which is the highest point in Mongolia, is 14,350 feet. So we have about a 3,500 elevation gain climb the next day. And this is the view from our tent. What we did here when we got there, though, was that they were checking on the weather, that there was supposed to be a pretty ferocious windstorm and snow and sleet coming in the next day. So we were battening down the hatches. You can see the big rock there on the left where we're really trying to tie down these tents in anticipation of what they're saying was going to be a pretty good storm coming that evening. So we were eating on the trip. The food on the trip was actually really good. Mongolia is a very meat-based culture, so that it's a herding culture. So this was, probably some beef product, with some rice. I like eating meat, so the food was great for me. And but again, we're getting one of our last meals here because we're thinking that we may be, locked into our tents here for the next 24 hours with a storm. So we're eating up now because we're not sure if we're going to be able to cook here as we go forward. And so sure enough, this storm came in and it was just ferocious. We went to bed that night, and this was probably at 2 o'clock the next afternoon, maybe about 6 o'clock the next afternoon. So it was about 18 hours straight of just high winds. We had 60-mile-an-hour winds. We had snow, we had sleet, we had rain, we had thunder, lightning. It was crazy, and didn't sleep much. And luckily our tents held up. We did get a little wet because there was it was actually rain for a while, and so we had some little rivers around our tent that got us a little soaked, but it was quite the experience. So this is me, and I actually have a short form video on this out of the tent for the first time in 18 hours or so after the storm. And that's actually a brand new coat that I got. I'll mention that on the way over they lost my luggage, so I had to buy a new coat for the trip when we came in. And again, this is a picture of our camp. You can see it's pretty foggy and gray. It's kind of approaching evening. We're wondering if we're going to be able to climb the next day. I was a bit concerned that if the mountain may have become unstable, with all the wind and the rain and snow, that there may be some loose rocks up there, and that the conditions, the mountain may need some time to stabilize. But again, I thought we were in good hands with our guides who had climbed this particular mountain 40 times, as well as our other American guide, Vern Tejas. So in these kind of things, you just defer to their judgment. But I was a little bit nervous, going to bed that night, if we were going to be able to have a summit attempt the next day. So there we are again. That's the final view. It looks like it was kind of clearing up again in the evening as we get ready to go to bed. So again, optimistic that maybe we could give it a shot the next day. So we woke up and around probably 4:35 a.m. and we headed off, and it was just a perfect day. The wind side down, it was bluebird sunny, and so this is us, coming up the mountain. This was a pretty steep section, so the climb itself, again, was only about, say 3,500 feet of gain, but there was some pretty steep section. This is about a 60-degree pitch right here, and you can see we're roped in and going up. And again, that's another picture. You can see he's not doing the ballerina. We're roped in there, so as you're stepping, you want to make sure you don't want to be stepping on the rope because you can actually, cause it to fail if you cut through it with your crampons. But again, this was a little bit, dangerous. But if somebody slips and falls, with that kind of a pitch, they're going to take out the team. There's actually another person below this. We had teams of 3. So that's the guy in the front, Vern, and one of the climbers is actually somebody below him. So if somebody loses their balance or whatever, on something steep like this, you start sliding down, you got to be really careful. You can take out the whole team. And that's why we carry ice axes to help ourselves self-arrest if indeed we do fall. And we got to the top there, though, and this is Ganga by our guide, and we're actually putting in a fixed line for the way down. So it's really steep going down. I wasn't as nervous about going up, but I was nervous about coming down that steep pitch. And so she actually put an anchor in, and we actually put a fixed line down that we could hold on to while we're going down. Most accidents in the mountains, probably 80% of the accidents on these peaks occur going down. And that's for a variety of reasons. You're tired. You maybe lose contact after you've made the summit. Now you believe you've achieved victory, but as I've been told in the past, the summit is really when you get back to base camp. And so again, you relax a little bit. You're tired. Sometimes at higher altitudes, you may get haste or hape, so you may be becoming affected by the altitude. This wasn't that high, so not the case. So I felt really comfortable that we were putting in a fixed line that we could lock into going down, so that would arrest us if we did happen to slip or fall on the way down, because it was a very steep section there. And again, that's our guide, Ganga. She's actually a national hero in Mongolia. Mongolia is a very small country. It's only 3.5 million people, but it's the 18th largest country by geography. So it's one of the most sparsely populated countries in the world. But she's the only Mongolian, male or female, to ever climb all summits. And she also did K2. And she's also a shaman and a medic, so she was the one performing the procedure on me. But I kind of call her a likable badass. I mean, this lady was the real deal. Again, really fun around camp, but up in the mountains, she was all business. And, definitely I felt very confident, climbing with her. So we are kind of taking a break on the way up. You can see just a beautiful day. Pretty warm, actually. There was no wind, and it was just spectacular. Going up on these climbs, we usually take a break about every hour. So we had 3 breaks on the way up, where you fuel up. When you're doing these climbs, again, you need to, refuel and drink water every hour. So we will go for an hour straight, then stop, regroup. And this happened to be a ledge we were able to regroup on and fuel up and then carry on. And again, there we are taking a break. You can see I had my coat unzipped. It was really a beautiful day. You can see it's pretty steep. You can see the pitch that we're sitting on there, and all the ropes. You got to be careful again that you don't step on the ropes with those sharp crampons there and compromise the actual ropes that could save your life in the event of a fall. So you have to be cognizant of that on these trips. Now we're at the summit. That's I'm there taking it, but this is the last group coming up. All smiles, spectacular view. The last part of the climb, the last couple hundred yards, pretty flat along the ridge there, so it was beautiful. And that's Baku. So that's the other guy, the other Mongolian guy. He's actually grew up as a nomad, and so he's now working as an apprentice to learn the climbing and tourist profession. Again, they're trying to develop a tourist industry in Mongolia, especially in this region. But again, the season's so short; it's only 2 months. So he still goes back and is a herder. In the off season, he has his herd of goats and cattle that he has from the family. And again, very interesting culture that I'll go through in another video. It was just a fantastic cultural experience being over there in Mongolia. And then you can see my gear. That's not my helmet, because again, they lost my luggage, so I had to borrow that helmet. That's not my coat. I had to borrow that coat, so I had to piece together my wardrobe in order to do this climb as a result of half my luggage being lost on the way over. And again, that's our other guide. That's the American guide, Vern Tejas. And I've been on other climbs with him in another video, and I talk about climbing with Vern. Vern has done all 7 summits 10 times. So he's an icon in the climbing world. And again, so we had set the best guide team between Vern and Ganga and Baku. It was just fabulous with those 3 guides and 6 of us. Again, we were in great hands and in climbing with the team. And again, that's a close-up of me with my gear. I think it's a cool picture. That's Tom, one of our teammates there in the background, standing on top of with the pose of Mount Khuiten. And that's our summit pick. Up there, again, a classic. It was just a spectacular day, and all smiles all around. So again, these are boots that I borrowed from a friend here in Sarasota. He's climbed Denali with these boots and several others. So they happen to be exactly my size 13. So I borrowed this everywhere I go. I shoot a picture of these boots and send them back to Peter so he has a record of where all his gear has been. And these boots, actually, after this trip, I had to retire them. They were pretty well shot from after 20 years of climbing in various expeditions, so I had to buy a new pair. But anyway, it was a great experience. After this, we began to head down, and we'll take you through the actual trekking part, the travels to Ulaanbaatar and Ogli, and the jeep rides and everything else that actually got us here in the first place, and all the cultural experiences we had. So this, again, Mongolia trip, it was really, that's why I've kind of broken it up into 2, because it was such a trip of a lifetime. There were so many great things that happened, and it's an adventure I'll never forget. If you like this, follow along and take a look at the other video.